I found footprints in my hallway. The problem? I live alone. And the footprints appeared every single morning. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe I forgot making them. But then I started hearing noises above my ceiling every night. And that's when I became convinced. Someone was living in my attic. A few days later, the situation became impossible to explain away. Up until that point, I had been doing my best to stay rational. The footsteps in the attic were disturbing. Sure, but there was always a chance there was some logical explanation. Maybe the house was settling. Maybe stress was making me notice things I would normally ignore. But then something changed. I started noticing food disappearing. Not large amounts. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make me question myself. A few slices of bread that I could have sworn were there the night before. A can of soup missing from the back of the pantry. Half a bottle of water that suddenly seemed emptier than I remembered. At first, I blamed myself. Have you ever walked into a room and forgotten why you went there? Or opened the refrigerator and completely forgotten what you were looking for? That's what I assumed was happening. I figured I was distracted. Maybe I was eating late at night and simply not remembering. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The missing food wasn't random. It kept happening. And the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. That's when I decided to test it. If someone, or something, was taking food from my kitchen, I needed proof. So I began documenting everything. Every evening before bed, I counted the items in my refrigerator. I took photos of the shelves. I lined up cans in the pantry and memorized their positions. I even used a marker to place tiny lines on water bottles so I could track the exact level inside. It felt ridiculous. Like something out of a paranoid detective movie. But at that point, I needed answers. The next morning, I checked my little experiment. My stomach dropped. The marks had moved. One bottle was lower than it had been the night before. A package of bread had fewer slices. A can of soup was gone. I stood there staring at the evidence, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. But there wasn't one. Someone had eaten that food. Someone had been inside my house. The problem was, there was no way in. Every door was locked. Every window was sealed. I checked them repeatedly. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was forced open. There were no signs of a break-in. And yet the evidence was sitting right in front of me. That's when fear started replacing doubt. I stopped asking whether something strange was happening. I started asking who was doing it. Determined to finally get an answer, I bought a security camera and installed it in the kitchen, pointing directly at the refrigerator. If anyone entered that room during the night, the camera would catch them. At least, that's what I thought. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded louder than usual. Every shadow seemed darker. I kept checking my phone, waiting for a motion alert. Nothing came. The next morning, I rushed to review the footage. Hours and hours of empty video. No movement. No intruder. No explanation. The kitchen remained completely still the entire night. Yet when I opened the refrigerator, my heart sank. More food was missing. I replayed the footage again. And again. And again. Nothing. No one entered. No one left. It was as if the food had simply vanished. That was the moment I began questioning my own sanity. because there are only so many times you can see evidence with your own eyes before you start wondering whether the real problem isn't in the house at all. Maybe the footsteps weren't real. Maybe the missing food wasn't real. Maybe I was losing my mind. But deep down, there was one thought I couldn't shake. What if the camera wasn't showing me everything? By the following weekend, I had reached my limit. For days, I had been trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation for everything. The footsteps, the missing food, the feeling that someone might be watching me from somewhere inside the house. But deep down, I already knew something wasn't right. And if there was even the slightest chance that someone had been living in my attic, I needed to know the truth. So early Saturday morning, armed with a flashlight and more courage than confidence, I decided to inspect the attic one final time. Thoroughly. No shortcuts. No quick glance from the ladder. I was going to search every inch of that space. I stood beneath the attic hatch and pulled down the folding ladder. The metal hinges groaned loudly as it unfolded, echoing through the silent house. For some reason, that sound made me nervous. It felt like an announcement. Like I was warning someone that I was coming. I climbed slowly, one step at a time. The attic was exactly as I remembered. Dust covered everything. Cardboard boxes sat untouched in the corners. Old insulation lined the floor and walls. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. At least, not at first. I moved my flashlight carefully across the room, checking every shadow and every corner. Minutes passed. Still nothing. I was beginning to feel foolish. Maybe the police were right. Maybe the missing food had some explanation I hadn't figured out yet. Maybe the noises really were coming from the house itself. Then my flashlight landed on something hidden behind a wooden support beam. And my heart immediately dropped. At first, I couldn't quite tell what I was looking at. But as I stepped closer, the details became impossible to miss. A blanket, folded neatly against the wall. Next to it were several empty water bottles, a pillow, food wrappers, and a few personal items partially hidden beneath a layer of dust. I froze. The air suddenly felt heavier. Because this wasn't random trash. This wasn't something left behind by a previous owner. Someone had arranged these things. Someone had used them. Someone had been living there. For a moment, I simply stood there staring, trying to process what I was seeing. Think about that for a second. Imagine discovering evidence that someone had been sleeping only a few feet above your bedroom every single night. Someone who could hear you talking, hear you sleeping, hear every phone call, every conversation, every movement inside your home. How long had they been there? Weeks? Months? Longer? The thought made my skin crawl. I backed away immediately and climbed down the ladder as fast as I could. Once downstairs, I locked myself in my living room and called the police. Within an hour, officers arrived and conducted a full search of the property. They inspected the attic. They examined the bedding. They checked every corner, every storage space, every possible hiding spot. But they found nobody. No intruder. No trespasser. No explanation. The officer told me it looked like someone had probably been staying there at some point but had already left. Maybe they got scared. Maybe they realized they had been discovered. Maybe they had been gone for days. Eventually, the police finished their report and prepared to leave. As they walked out the door, One of the officers gave me a reassuring smile and said the case was probably over. Whoever had been there was long gone. Case closed. At least, that's what they believed. But standing alone in that house later that night, staring up at the ceiling above my bedroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were wrong. Because something about the attic still didn't feel empty. And deep down, I had the unsettling sense that the real discovery hadn't happened yet. It was only beginning. I wasn't convinced. The police may have considered the case closed, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was still wrong. The evidence in the attic was real. The missing food was real. And those footsteps above my bedroom certainly felt real. So I decided to do something the police hadn't done. I installed another camera. This time, not in the kitchen. Not outside the house. Inside the attic itself. I mounted it on a support beam and pointed it directly at the makeshift sleeping area where the blanket, pillow, and empty bottles had been found. If someone came back, I would finally know. The first night passed. Nothing. I checked the footage the next morning. Hours of darkness. No movement. The second night was exactly the same. At that point, I started wondering if maybe the officers had been right all along. Maybe whoever had been living there had already left. Maybe I was chasing a ghost. Then came the third night. The following morning, I opened the camera app while drinking coffee. At first, everything looked normal. The attic was dark and silent. Then I noticed a motion alert. Timestamp: 2:14 a.m. My heart immediately started racing. I clicked play. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, from the far corner of the attic, something moved. A shadow slowly emerged from the darkness. Not an animal. Not a trick of the light. A person. A woman. Thin. Pale. Wearing dirty, worn-out clothing. She crawled out from behind a section of insulation I had never thought to inspect. As if she'd been hiding there the entire time. I couldn't look away. She moved slowly toward the center of the frame. Then she stopped and looked directly into the camera. For a moment, she didn't move at all. Then she smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a nervous smile. The kind of smile that instantly makes your stomach drop. And before I could react, the recording ended. Just like that. No explanation. No sign of where she went. Only one terrifying question remained. How long had she been watching me? The next morning, I called the police again. This time, I had something they couldn't ignore. The footage. I showed them the recording from 2:14 a.m. The woman, the smile, the hidden area behind the insulation. Within hours, officers were back inside my house. And this time, they weren't treating it like a routine call. They went straight to the attic. Armed with tools, flashlights, and a lot more urgency than before. I stood below, listening as they pulled sections of insulation away from the walls. Then one of the officers shouted. They had found something. Behind the insulation was a hidden crawl space. Not just a small gap between walls. An actual concealed area large enough for a person to live inside. When they crawled in, the discovery was even more unsettling than I expected. There were piles of clothing, empty food containers, water bottles, old blankets, personal belongings scattered throughout the space. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Someone had been living there. Not for days. Not for weeks. Possibly for months. maybe even years. The realization sent a chill through me. While I had been eating dinner, watching television, and sleeping peacefully in my bedroom, someone could have been only a few feet away the entire time. Listening, watching, waiting. But then came the strangest part. The woman was gone. The officers searched every corner of the crawlspace. Nothing. No fingerprints. No identification. No photographs. No documents. No clues about who she was or where she came from. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Eventually, the police settled on a simple explanation. They believed she had escaped sometime during the night after realizing she had been recorded. And honestly, that theory would have made perfect sense. Except for one problem. There was only one known entrance to that hidden space. And reaching it required passing through my house. Past my cameras. Past the kitchen. Past the front door. Yet when investigators reviewed every second of footage, they found nothing. No one entered. No one left. Which left me with a question that still bothers me to this day. If she didn't leave through the house, then where did she go? 3 months ago, I moved into an old 2-story house just outside of town. It wasn't the kind of place most people would dream about. The paint was peeling in a few spots. The floors creaked when you walked across them. And the previous owner had left behind more questions than answers. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore. The price. It was unbelievably cheap. In fact, it was so cheap that a few of my friends joked there had to be a catch. Maybe the plumbing was bad. Maybe the foundation was sinking. Maybe the house was haunted. We laughed about it at the time. But looking back now, I wish I had taken those jokes more seriously. Still, I didn't ask too many questions. After years of renting tiny apartments and sharing walls with noisy neighbors, I was excited to finally have a place of my own. A quiet place, a fresh start. For the first few weeks, everything felt normal. The house was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Then the sounds started. The first time I heard them, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone. The clock read 2:03 a.m. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a faint creak above my head. I froze. A few seconds later, another one. Slow. Deliberate. As if someone had shifted their weight on an old wooden floor. At first, I brushed it off. Old houses make noise all the time. Right? Wood expands and contracts. Pipes rattle. Roofs settle. That's what I told myself. But the next night, it happened again. And the night after that. Always around the same time. Always coming from the attic. Eventually, the sounds became impossible to ignore. They didn't sound random. They sounded intentional, like footsteps. Slow footsteps. One after another. Moving from one side of the attic to the other. Imagine lying awake in complete darkness, listening to what sounds like someone pacing directly above your bedroom. How long would it take before curiosity turned into fear? For me, it didn't take long. One night, I grabbed a flashlight and decided to investigate. I climbed the attic ladder, heart pounding harder with every step. Nothing. No animals. No raccoons. No birds trapped in the roof. No broken pipes. No loose boards. No explanation. The attic was completely empty. At least, that's what it looked like. I went back downstairs feeling embarrassed. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe stress was getting to me. But the following night, the footsteps returned. And this time, they seemed even closer. I noticed something else, too. Every single time I reached for my flashlight, the sounds stopped instantly. Not gradually. Not after a few seconds. Immediately. As if whoever, or whatever, was up there somehow knew I was coming. That was the moment I stopped thinking of the noises as a house problem. Because houses don't react. Houses don't go silent the second you decide to investigate. And as I lay awake listening to the silence above me, a question began creeping into my mind. What if I wasn't alone in that house? What if someone else was listening, too?